Aloha, everybody. Welcome to Tiki Tuesday Talks. We're back at it again. With as we're getting into fall here, we're going to keep the tiki flowing. Excited to be with you guys. Here's the crew. Hi, everybody. Hi, Josh. Looking good. We'll skip you for the moment. Kelsey, where are you calling in from?
Hey, y'all. I'm calling in from up here in Toronto, Canada.
Awesome. How's it up there? Is it winter yet?
It's not winter,
Oh, okay.
Thank God. We're sunny, and we're supposed to be having this long like summer straight into November. So I'm fingers crossed, because this winter is meant to be like awful. So yeah, it's real nice here.
Josh, where are you at? Looking good over there.
Calling in from Otter Tail up near Fargo.
Wait, Otter Tail where?
Otter Tail Lake. It's in Minnesota.
Can you pan it out, or we need to see the lake?
This is Otter.
Lovely.
Wow.
Very calm today.
You're looking good. Good.
It's not a C, but
it's not a C. No. Tiki by the lake, Tiki by the bay. We've had it all.
Yeah.
Steva, talk to me. What's happening over there?
Oh, I'm in Birmingham with my plant, George. And I wish that I was in Toronto with Kelsey. One, to just hug you in person, and two, to wish Jess Smith a happy birthday, because it was her birthday this weekend. So if you know a Jess Smith that lives in Toronto, please wish her a happy birthday. She's great. Super excited about this class today.
Indeed, going to be a good one. We're having two weeks of tiki sustainability discussions.
Yeah,
so it's going to be really exciting. This is part one.
Hell yeah.
Aaron, what's going on? Talk to us about your plant there.
This is. I don't know what her name is yet, but she's large. She's large, and just take. I'm in my tropical oasis, aka my apartment in Baltimore, Maryland.
There you go.
And enjoying this lovely fall weather, and excited to hear this talk today.
Excellent. Is there anything more tropical than Baltimore?
Minnesota.
Fair. All right. Let's get to it. A couple of details for you guys. So Kelsey is a co-founder of the Trash Collective. We'll get into the fine and points and details of the bio in a moment. We're going to talk about trash tiki and fermentation with a real application at home component to it as well, which we're excited about. So as usual, chat box and questions. If you guys are on Crowdcast or if you're on Facebook Live, feel free to send questions our way. We appreciate you sharing the event, starting a watch party, etc. PayPal is Kelsey at the Trash Collective. She's going to talk about where that's going to get donated to. We'll do our presentation for 30 to 40, cocktail session for 10, and then 5 questions with Josh at the lake. So, Kelsey, I cut down her bio. It was probably 8 pages, I think. Very, very impressive. She's bringing years of experience to the hospitality industry, doing at bars and restaurants in Canada, including 3 years as a GM and when she moved to London to become a bartender at Dandelion, internationally renowned bar with an amazing program. While she was there, she thought of adding even more to her plate. In October 16, she and partner Ian Griffiths launched Trash Tiki, which I'm sure you guys have heard of, an online sustainable focused platform and touring pop-up bar that really is focused on using byproducts and food waste that bars normally discard. This became a platform for the craft cocktail industry on would-be waste ingredients, mostly ditched, and then could still offer up flavors and other uses. After a ton of travel, and I'm kind of cutting this short, she decided to move back to Canada. She's in Toronto. and she opened up her own spot called Supernova. So we'll kick it over. How's it going?
Hey guys. Thanks for having me so much. I'm really excited to be here and kind of talk through some of this stuff. Do we go to the slideshow now, or should I?
We'll do it. Let's make it happen.
Awesome. Did I? Yeah. Okay.
Nope, that's actually mine.
Okay.
So you get yours back.
Awesome. So today we're going to talk through fermentation and flavor stability. A little bit of an update, I guess, since I wrote that bio, should probably update that a little bit. Supernova has unfortunately closed. So I want to commiserate and also send my condolences to anyone who has had any struggles over these last, 6 months. I am here for you. I feel you. It was very, very difficult making that decision. But it was unquestionably the right decision. I feel really good having done it. So I'm going to talk about fermentation and flavor stability for the reason that we have all had to scale back our prep. And we're making, at least for myself, definitely, and I know that other bars in Toronto have really had to scale back because we just don't have the capacities. We're not as busy. The to-go drinks definitely are not. I'm going to share the presentation so you guys can see it. It was just the title slide I was talking through anyway. There we go. Sorry, guys. 1 second while I figure this out. Not the most tech savvy person in the world, so there we go.
Here, we're
right,
with it.
there we go, and we're back in business.
Back in business.
So we've all had to scale back our prep. I know that I now have a to-go drinks business called Dolly Trolley Drinks. So they're like little cute mason jars. I was talking through anyway. There we go. I think there's a little bit of a lag with the sound there. Sorry, guys. Okay. I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Sorry.
I think we're good. I think we're good now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to give you guys some tips, some recipes, and some stuff that you can do that essentially, instead of creating a 1 liter syrup that may or may not get used in the 3 to 5 days that it's shelf stable, is to give you some recipes that can be used in the same way. But instead of having 3 to 5 days of stability, you're going to have 3 to 6 months. Which is so valuable, not only from a saving your kind of prep ingredients side, but being able to also use seasonal ingredients, and then also cut down a little bit on prep time. So you yourself and your staff can really, make the most out of the face-to-face time with guests instead of being in the kitchen. So that being said, we're just going to launch straight into it. And then do I flip the slideshow, or do you do that?
You do it.
Okay, cool. Right. So we're going to skip. This is kind of what we're just going to go through today. I'm going to skip over the about me because we went through that. But we're really going to start understanding, before we get into the recipes, which sort of comes at the end, we're going to understand what the different types of fermentations are and what the major components of them are, sort of to create. So what you kind of want to do with any type of fermentation is create the best possible scenario for the type of thing that you want to grow, and then minimize sort of the danger aspects. So we're really going to get into what the different types are. So wild versus controlled, some things that you can do not to kill anyone. We're going to get into some typical safety procedures, some mistakes that honestly that I have made, and some things that I've seen where, in cocktail competitions or different things while I've been traveling, where I was like, oh, that's not quite how you're not meant to do that. And then we'll break it down into 3 major ferments. So these 3 we're going to get into a wine, beer sort of situation, a lacto fermentation, and a kombucha. And I think that these 3 really encompass the major types that I think that are used most in bars, but not only that kind of encompass both wild and controlled, and then 3 different styles, I guess, of fermentation. We're going to finish on I'm going to pepper some resources in through this, but there's some really good books. I'm sure most of you, if you're interested in this, have the NOMA book already, but there's some other stuff and some reference guides and some really cool people that you can follow that have helped build the NOMA book, in addition to some other people. So I'm going to give you guys that and some people I follow personally. And then we're going to finish on a really delicious drink. So if you have had access to any of the recipes so far, the little peach fermentation, so we're gonna go through that. And we're gonna make a little cocktail on this delicious rum right here. We can skip this.
I mean, I obviously didn't do the best job. Feel free to go.
No, you did a great job. I'll just skip through really quickly. I am originally from BC. I kind of got my start in the cocktail industry actually in Toronto. So I was a club bartender. I feel like everyone needs to cut their teeth and get quick in a way like I did. I know that a lot of people are lucky enough to just start cocktail bartending right away, and that's amazing and good for you. But I think when I was coming up, people weren't so keen to put females behind the bar, so there was a little bit of working as a hostess and doing and working my time through. So that's kind of where I came from, and then I moved back to BC. I started managing a bar called the Oakwood. I eventually became GM, and I started getting really into wine. And I kind of reached a peak in my career where I felt like I couldn't learn any more from the position that I was in. So that's when I sort of made the decision to move to London and find mentorship, which I think is really, really important in this industry. If you guys have ever had the opportunity, or even if you don't, that's kind of where I had to stop and turn around and say, okay, I need to really find people who can teach me more about stuff that I can learn online or on the internet. And I think that our industry has really grown in that way. There is so much more information available now, and things like this that are available for free. So there's one good thing that's come out of COVID. It is that all of these things are now online and completely free, which is a really, really big positive. Yeah.
What years were we talking about? So what years were you in the club game? And then when did you move over to Oakwood?
I started, I think I started bartending. This is really funny. I started bartending when I was 20 years old. So that would have been in 2000 and math.
Right. Okay, cool. Got it.
So yeah, I lived in Toronto from 2006 to about 2008, and then moved back to, I moved to Ireland in there, and then moved back to BC. And then I think in 2014, I moved to London. So.
So I still, as we talked about a pre-show, I still haven't really learned how to make a proper cocktail. Do you recommend I get into the club bartending scene to start?
I mean, right now, probably not. And I definitely had to, I did my time, and I had to take a step back. And I think that there's definitely more opportunities now for young bartenders to not have to do that.
Right.
But at that time, it was definitely you had to work in a pub or somewhere high volume before you'd even get looked at for a cocktail bar, especially as a woman. So yeah, that was definitely part of it.
And then what about the gig in the UK, or the city, or the bar itself brought you over there?
It was a choice. It was either between London or New York, or I think there was one other one, maybe Sydney or Melbourne, Australia. But I really just wanted to get out of Canada and kind of make a name for myself and then come back, which I think I did.
Yep, you did.
And I looked at New York, and I sort of saw the direction that it was going. And I think this was 2013, 2014, when, places like, Nightjar and really visual cocktails were starting to coming out, and molecular stuff was starting to be a thing. And well, actually kind of reaching its peak. And London seemed to be like winning all the awards. And that's when, so I moved, I staged pretty much everywhere. And then that's how I landed on Dandelion. A whole bunch of friends were like, no, you should go work there. And it was obviously before it was in, I think they were like 6 or 8 months into post opening, and kind of had that thing that happens with every venue when, you know, the opening crew, some of them sort of start leaving. So there was an opportunity for me to get my foot in the door. And, you know, I met some of the best friends and mentors that I've ever had in my entire career, could have hoped for. So it was a really like incredible experience. And, you know, if people have the opportunity to go and travel and do that, I was really fortunate to be able to, like, you know, pick up and leave.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's too bad you didn't come to New York, because then we could have hung out. But here we are, meeting on a live stream. You know, it's great.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna go on to the next slide. So this slide is super important, and I really want you guys to sort of understand the difference between these two types of fermentations. So we're going to go over, for the most part, mostly for safety reasons, but also because there's a number of different variables with wild fermentation. For if you're just starting into fermentation, you're kind of doing one or two things. We're really going to go into controlled. So this is what I mean by controlled, is like an induced fermentation. So you're starting from, you know, either a yeast or a SCOBY or something that you that is cultivated, that you've purchased or borrowed, or, you know, got from somebody else, that you're putting into a liquid that will start your fermentation. And what this does is allows that microorganism to get a little bit of a head start over any other possible contaminants. We're going to go over contaminants and the nightmare that they can be a little bit later. So that is what I mean by controlled fermentation, whereas wild fermentation is kind of, you're creating a situation, I guess, for lack of a better term, or like a little home for microorganisms that you want in there. So this could be whether, like, for example, tepache. In a traditional tepache, not the one on the Trash Tiki website, while it is a great recipe and it is very safe, it is not a traditional tepache. So if you go to Mexico and you see tepache on the menu, that is a wild fermentation, because there is yeast that actually occurs naturally on organic pineapples. That's before they've come to North America and gotten waxed and had all these contacts with external possible contaminants. This is like naturally grown beautiful pineapples. That's why also they taste so much better in Mexico than here.
It's amazing. Yeah, and Brazil.
Yeah. So exactly.
It's like a different fruit.
For sure. So there's like, and they're so much sweeter. They're so much better.
Yeah.
So there's a naturally occurring yeast on the outside. So traditional fermentation is started from that yeast. So you can just kind of put sugar and water and spices on the outside of pineapple and you'll have a wild fermentation. Whereas here in North America, or kind of anywhere else in the world, what I'd recommend doing is adding a yeast like you would do to a beer or wine, so that you have a controlled fermentation. So it's a little bit safer. So that's kind of the differentiation. Some other examples would be lacto fermentation, where you're actually killing the other stuff, the sort of bad stuff, with salt. But you are allowing a wild fermentation to occur. So both of them are good, but for all kind of, we are going to go a little bit into lacto fermentation. For the intensive purposes, we're going to just understand what the differences are, but we're going to focus on more of controlled for this.
Great.
Cool. All right. So these are like the field guides. Sandor Katz is one of the the best references for fermentation guides. These books are all very well known. The ones on and they also matched my slideshow, which was really nice.
Great color scheme. Yeah, well done.
So the art of fermentation that goes into mostly controlled. These guides to fermentation are mostly food based. So if you're kind of diving in and you're really wanting to create things that you can drink, there is going to be a good level of stuff that you're just going to have to flip through. But they do give you, if especially the art of fermentation, like the thing is like a Bible and it's got really thin pages. So they're reference guides unless you really, really want to dive in and making some like weird pickles and like cool stuff. Obviously the NOMA Guide to Fermentation is like the industry standard on cool stuff to ferment. But these are kind of where I go when I'm like, I don't know what to do. I don't know why this ferment smells funny or what's going on here, and I don't have any reference. I will really dive into these, and these are kind of like the base of everything. So if you're really getting into fermentation right now, these are the books to use as a guide at any time.
Let's say you're a home kind of cocktail person, and you got the budget for one book. Which one of these books do you get?
Oh man, I would leave the wild fermentation is definitely like after you've done some experimentation with the other two. The NOMA guide really does break it down so that it's a little bit easier for home, whereas the art of fermentation is like so much information. It could be a little bit more overwhelming. So if you're buying one, I would do the NOMA one for sure.
Cool.
Yeah. Right. So a little bit more definitions before we get into some safety stuff. Within wild and controlled, there are two types of fermentation that I think are really, really important to define, because if you have one type of microorganism and you are not fermenting it in the right way, that is, you're not making, essentially, I'm going to talk about the right house for it or the right conditions. You could possibly—
I like the house analogy.
Yeah. You got to make the right house. They have to be comfortable. So for example, if you were to take a wine or a yeast fermentation and do it anaerobically, that would possibly create a house that could be attacked by something that you don't want in there. So anaerobic would mean that like you're not allowing the wine yeast to breathe, which means it will die, and then God knows what else will grow in there and kind of replace it. And similarly, if you have a lacto fermentation that you are leaving open air, that pretty much leaves it open to any kind of contaminants to kind of get in there, mess with the lacto, and also create bad bacteria that you don't necessarily want in there. So you want to definitely make sure that you have the right house. Yeah, I think that pretty much describes aerobic and anaerobic. So in a basic kind of format, aerobic fermentation requires oxygen to grow and thrive. So it's like a combination of yeast, water, sugar, and oxygen to like really, and you'll see little bubbles, they'll be breathing. It's like really, really cool. And then anaerobic fermentation, you want no oxygen in there. So things like lacto ferments, there's different ways that we'll go into when we get really into the lacto ferments and things like sauerkraut and kimchi, until they're fully, once they're fully fermented, then you'll see that they're okay to be introduced back into a little bit of air. But while they're fermenting, you really want to make sure that those conditions are perfectly without access to oxygen.
Can you give us an example of some containers, houses, if you will,
Indeed,
that might exist for both of these types?
Yeah, so I've got one right here.
Oh, great. Let's bring it up.
This is kombucha SCOBY. So this is kind of like my hotel right now because it's so
That's a big one.
It's not even the biggest one. Here. He's really big. So this one all I've done is taken a glass jar, a little bit of cheesecloth so that, no bugs or anything airborne can get large and airborne can get in there, and then just giving it a little wrap on top. Right now I don't have a lacto ferment going, but here's what I do. And this is in the Noma book. So you can do a couple of different things. I've seen people do lacto ferments in a vac bag. So if you have a pack machine, that is like the easiest way of getting air out of a liquid solid situation, and then just leaving it to ferment. You just have to make sure that like you're burping it and keeping an eye on it. The other thing that I more commonly do, because I try to avoid single-use plastics, is that I will. So essentially, what you do is put your liquid in the bottom, liquid in your fruit mixture with salt. I'll put like a reusable bag or like a piece of just a piece of plastic over the top of that, and then something weighted in the top. So like either a little stone in between so it'll go like stone, plastic, liquid. And what that does, it just kind of keeps all of the air from seeping in all the way around, and allows the thing to ferment while allowing air out. So,
got it.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. This is super important, so I thought I'd make it funny.
Good.
Okay, so I'm going to talk through each of these things. Why I use gloves. I'm just going to go back to the stream here so I can see myself. So I use gloves because they don't look so cool, but even though we're like right now during COVID, we're like washing our hands a bazillion times a day, it doesn't get rid of everything. Your hands have like naturally occurring oils in the skin, and then also underneath, especially if you have nails or you have nail polish on, little bits of bacteria that you can't even see can get can potentially contaminate something. So I always just use gloves when I'm handling my ferments, especially kombucha. They really, really hate the oils in your skin and can introduce God knows what. Vessels, like I just said. So kombucha especially really hates metal. And the lacto ferments hate metal as well. The thing with metal is that you have something in a container, even if it's stainless, you have it in there for a certain amount of time. And what happens over that time is that as the yeast or microorganisms kind of eat the sugar that you fed it, they produce acid. And this acid can eat away at whatever it's in contact with. So whether that's a plastic, a glass, or a stainless steel, you just have to be really, really aware that anything that's metal is going to change because it's a naturally occurring material. Sorry, that's a bit of a mouthful. So the best thing I find to ferment especially with kombucha is glass, but you can also buy fermentation safe plastic tubs, which is what I do all of my like beers and wines in. You can also get like big demijohns or special fermentation vessels that are glass. So glass is definitely like the best thing because it's not as porous as plastic and won't like absorb potential contaminants. But I've definitely fermented wines and beers in fermentation specific plastic tubs. So they are made for fermentation, but so vessel is pretty damn important. If you're
not the Home Depot buckets.
No, God, no. Oh my God, I see that too. Because they look really similar to those like fermentation buckets. So yeah, if they are not food safe plastic, steer clear. Thanks. That was a really good point. Potassium metabisulfate. That's such a big word. It sounds like so cool. I sound like a scientist, even though I'm not.
Sounds very scientific. Yeah.
So potassium metabisulfate you can find on Amazon if you're trying to boycott Amazon like I am. You can also get it from your local homebrew store. Also support local business. Cool.
Yep.
So in your space, this is actually pretty important. I think it gets, I think space gets overlooked a little bit when we're talking about fermentation. So you want somewhere that's like, not necessarily cool, dark space, but you want somewhere that is medium lit and temperature steady. So any kind of fluctuations in temperature, like this happened to I've been growing mushrooms at home because it's very, very similar. It was like the natural progression from fermentations in terms of contamination. So anytime you have like humid and hot, and then you're condensing that down by turning the air conditioning on and changing the temperature, you're also introducing condensation on the side of the glass. And what condensation does is essentially take everything that's in the air inside your vessel and putting it on the outside where it drips down into. So that's a contaminant, and it's really frustrating. So you want to make sure that like it's, you know, room temperature up to like maybe 23 degrees tops, that your relative humidity, if you can control that, whether it's like in a basement or in a closet or somewhere that like isn't as susceptible to outside air, that's kind of like where your space. Also keep it outside of like high traffic areas, whether you can see it or not. I'm going to talk about invisible contaminants because they're really goddamn annoying. You just have to control the things that you can't see. So anytime that you've got like a cat or a dog or yourself like walking past a fermentation area, you're kicking up all of the little dust that you can't see on the floor, and then that's going into the vessel if it's an open air vessel, and creating the contaminants. So
got it. There was a question that came up: where do you get the plastic safe vessels and things like that?
Usually the homebrew stores will have them. I think they.
Sorry, what was that store? I know you mentioned it, but.
Oh, just anywhere that sells like homebrew supplies.
Oh, home brewing. Got it.
Yeah. The Amazon also has them.
Right.
Yeah, and also with those, you can order like a lid and an airlock on the top. Airlocks are super important as well. So you're going to want to order the tub. It'll have a little hole in the. Wish I had one here. I don't think I do. I have the tub, but I don't have the top. It has a little hole in the top, and then you stick the airlock in there. And what the airlock does is allow the CO2 that's produced by the fermentation to escape. Not
the other air in.
What's that?
But not the other air in. So
yeah,
it's
exactly.
Air to escape. Got it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Air out, no air in.
Right on.
Yeah. Right. I'm gonna go through these like a little bit quickly, just only because while they're important, if you're doing things right, they won't happen all that often. So botulism doesn't really happen in lacto ferments that often because you're adding enough salt to kill any outside bacteria. It's only when you're and in vinegar ferments like pickles and things like that. So if it doesn't contain enough acid or salt, you're kind of creating a pH balance that botulism doesn't like. Again, back to the house, if you're like, you know, adding these things that a possible intruder won't like, that's like your ideal situation. So anytime you don't have enough vinegar or enough salt, you're kind of leaving yourself open to outside intrusion from botulism. It also happens when like you're not washing everything, which is the same thing for salmonella. So the opposite thing between botulism and salmonella is one grows aerobically and the other one grows anaerobically. So there's two things that can possibly fuck your ferment in either situation. So you want to just make sure that you're avoiding that at all costs. Salmonella is really uncommon in ferments, but it's essentially, it happens in, and I just make mention of this because it happens in raw things. So anytime that you're exposing, you don't really know where your vegetables have come in contact with. So just always wash your fruit. We all know this as bartenders, like wash your stuff, but this couldn't be more important than to make sure that you're washing it at home. I will mention again, I think I skipped over some information with potassium metabisulfate. It's a solution that you should use to clean your vessels before you even start, because what it does is clean off any possible microorganisms that you don't want that already exist on your vessels. So that is kind of what that is for. I also use it in between ferments if I'm like just cleaning out the jar or whatever. You just have to make sure that, because it will kind of kill anything fermenting, that you rinse it really, really well afterwards. So that's what that does.
Cool. And is that a similar scenario? Like these are the same spots you're going to be getting those kind of materials as well?
Yeah. So this is just like, these are just like potential things that could happen. So you just want to make sure that like everything is washed, that you're starting clean. This is like, I mean, this is like bartending sort of 101, but it is like times 20 when you're talking about ferments, because like anything that you've started with is just going to get bigger and badder as you go. Yeah. So outside contaminants is anything that you haven't covered properly. So I'm going to tell a little bit of a story because I saw this thing, and I was like, it was during a cocktail competition, and they definitely like got into some wild fermentation stuff, which is super cool. And I was like, okay, so how did you do this fermentation? And what they'd done was taken the fruit and sugar and water and put it in an open container on the top of their like coffee machine, because it was a little bit warmer, which is a good idea for using like, heat. But the problem is the heat was centralized at the bottom. So you're going to get a differentiation of heat throughout the vessel. But it's also a high traffic area. So you're going to get all kinds of shit that just might land in the top. So that's kind of what I mean by outside contaminants. You really need to make sure that like whatever you have is covered either by cheesecloth that allows air through, or an airlock. Ideally, an airlock is a little bit better because it really like does not allow anything to enter in. And then the last one is eels, and I'm going to give you guys some like these things. I had a ferment going, a kombucha. These happen in kombuchas more often than not, and it can happen even when you're being super safe. They'll just exist, especially when your kombucha SCOBY starts slowing down and not producing as much. These are sort of what happens. So in a life cycle of kombucha, they'll go into this like dormant state where other things can sort of start growing. So these are really gross. I've had them occur in one of my kombuchas. I'm going to be fully transparent with y'all. They're really easy to notice because you'll see something moving inside and you'll be like, oh my God, see what you do whenever you see like any kind of contaminant is throw the whole whack out. I can't stress this enough. There is no saving these things. Once you see a part of a contaminant, you have to throw the whole thing away. They're so gross. Yeah. All right, so that is sort of like our safety precautions. Do we get any questions about the safety stuff? I think it was pretty straightforward, but
pretty straightforward. I think you did a good job breaking it down. Okay,
cool. So the three basic ferments we're going to go through today is like a wine beer style ferment. I definitely developed this. It's not, obviously this type of fermentation has been around. I didn't develop it, but it's been around for a long time. I developed it from doing tepaches a whole bunch. So tepaches are kind of a really great place to start. If you want to hop on trashtikisucks.com, if you guys are kind of new to fermentation, it gives you a really basic like recipe of a beer style like pineapple fermentation. It's not by in any means a typical tepache. And then we're going to go through a lacto ferment. I did a lot of these at Supernova. They're just such a great way of like stretching out your fruit especially after you've juiced it. And then also allowing you, like, I think the pear season up here in the wild north is like 3 weeks long. So we really had to figure out how we were going to get a full menu flip off of these things. Yeah. So that's where the lacto ferment came from. And then we're just going to briefly touch on kombucha. I know that there's a lot of online resources, but there's also a lot of like hippie ass misinformation out there. We're going to get into that.
Good old hippies. Question for you. Like, where did you start getting into this? Was it in the UK at Dandelion? Was it because of some specific solve, as you mentioned, like how do you get a full menu season out of it, or like where did the interest really start?
It started at Dandelion. I think we had pineapple on our menu, and we were doing some development from one menu to the other, and we all started work as a team. So we're definitely encouraged at Dandelion to like use what we already have in-house before we start reaching out for like weird ingredients. That was like the MO at the time. So pineapple was one of the things that we started messing around with. And I think somebody was using the leaves for the bitterness, and somebody was using like skins. And this was kind of a time when like I was starting to learn about Mexican ingredients, because I was in Guadalajara for the Altos competition at the time. So I kind of came back with like this little bit of working knowledge of what a tepache was. So that's when we started introducing like different types of fermentations. I think I ended up doing like messing around with like honey and agave, both of which are very difficult to ferment because the binding agents within the sugar, especially with agave sugars, they are very, very tight, so it's very hard to get like airflow through there. So it's much easier to start a tepache from experience on just like a castor sugar or a natural sugar, rather than like honey or agave.
Got it.
But that's kind of where that all started, and then it just was like it started steamrolling, especially with Supernova, where I was like, oh my god, how do I do this? How do I get like how do I stretch my ingredients? Because we had a big, huge basement, but we just couldn't like the growing season in Toronto is really, really small. So like you'll have something, pass through your purveyors for like 2 weeks, and like everybody's scrambling to get it. And I'm like, I've got like 6 cases of the thing. Like, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was out of necessity for sure.
Understood. Cool.
Yeah. Cool. So this is kind of the base recipe that I use for any kind of fermentation. The yeast, this is just an example of a yeast. You can definitely order your yeast from Amazon. Again, you can get them from a home brewer or, a home brew wine supply shop. Champagne is one that I really like using just because it kicks off really easily. It comes in like a dehydrated powder form, and then you just keep it refrigerated, and then you just add it to a little bit of water. So it's super easy, kind of idiot proof to start. Sugar, I usually add sugar at about a 20% ratio. Now this sugar is one of the really cool things that you can start playing with in terms of like adding a little bit more at the start to kick things off or dialing it back. Obviously water will stretch out this is the other really cool thing about these types of ferments, is that by adding this much water, and you can, obviously you can add more fruit to that if you want. You can kind of play with the ratios there, but like by adding 15 liters of water, like you end up with so much more than you would have had just juicing. So you get like, you get out of 4 kilograms of peaches, or I guess, I don't know what kilos in pounds is. I think it's about half.
It's like 2.2 to 1.
Okay, yeah. So like
it's like 8. That's like 8.8 pounds or something like that.
Okay, so like 8 pounds of peaches, which I guess is like probably a case. You're getting like 20 liters of stuff.
Got it.
Is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Question on champagne yeast. Like, I get the simplicity of using it. Does it deliver a different flavor profile or textural element than others you might use?
Definitely. I have used brewer's yeast before, like a beer yeast. So beer yeast will get there's definitely different flavor profiles. Texturally, they're all approximately the same.
Okay.
I do find from champagne yeast, this is why I kind of like using it as the experimental yeast, that it doesn't have like an overpowering like barnyardy flavor. It's pretty like cultivated and nuanced. So you can really kind of see what the fruit as it's fermenting tastes like without any kind of other factors.
Got it.
And sort of affecting the end flavor, which is what you kind of get with brewer's yeast or like maybe a Pinot Noir yeast or something like that. So that's what I start with. And then if I want to say maybe I want to get it a little bit more funky, then I'll start playing with some other yeasts, or like I've even gone to like a brewer in, where was it, in Sydney, Australia, and I was like, I don't have time to get yeast. I can't order from Amazon here. I don't know what was going on at the time. I was like, can I just have some of your like fermentation? And they'll just literally, because they've got like thousands of liters of the stuff at a time, you can take a little bit of a fermentation that's going already, and this can be at home, whether you've got like a tapache that's happening. You can start another fermentation from the fermentation you've already got going, so long as it hasn't been distilled or arrested.
Got it.
I'll talk about arresting in a second.
Right on. I actually am going to have some questions for you on the side about some yeast project we're working on.
Okay, cool.
So I definitely want to pick your brain on that.
Awesome.
That's neither here nor there.
Okay. So that's kind of like really basics of like anything. The only one thing I will say about your base fruit, you can use anything you want. So you can do a peach wine. You can do like, I've done a cranberry wine before, which was probably on the more acidic level of the spectrum. We were probably like, it still worked really, really well. You're gonna want to like flash blend your fruit just to get some like aeration going. It also increases surface area, so you've got more. You're essentially creating something that the yeast wants to eat, right? So anything that's like super fibrous, the only thing it's not gonna want to eat, and kind of use your common sense here, is anything that's like overly acidic. So like anything like lemon, lime, grapefruit, that's all going to halt your fermentation, which you can add at the end if you really want to stop something from fermenting any further. But if you're trying to create like lime or a lemon fermentation, this is not the style to use. You can ferment those things, just not this way.
Got it.
Yeah. And from there, like once you've created all of those conditions, you're keeping it at room temperature, you've got like somewhere not too humid, you're good to go. Like this thing is pretty easy to get rolling. In a couple of days, you're going to see little bubbles. Once those bubbles subside, if you smell anything like that doesn't, and don't like stick your head in it, because you're going to get a whiff of CO2. It's the same thing when you're like visiting a rum distillery and you're like, ooh, this is cool, and you stick your head in a fermentation vat, and you're like, that's not a good thing to do. So you're just going to want to wave it towards you. Same thing you would do at a distillery when you're seeing like these big fermentation vats, because they produce a lot of CO2, and that can make you really feel like great, give you a head rush in not a good way. So that's kind of that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah. And the other thing is that like I've done these ferments in both Canada and like Mexico and like Singapore, and they all took different lengths of time. So there's no like recipe where I'm going to say leave to ferment for 3 days. This is like anywhere from Singapore was 24 hours because it was so naturally humid, even in an air controlled area. And then in Toronto, I think one of them took like 10 days because it was so like cold and a little bit dry when it was in the spring. So
yeah, it's really interesting. So I have a cachaça brand, and we have a producer. It's about 4 hours outside of the city of Rio, and it's a 24-hour airborne yeast fermentation. And some people who I talk to are like, 24 hours, are you sure? I'm like, I think I'm sure. I mean, I don't know. So yeah, I mean, there you go. I guess it is amazing just the difference that climate, you know, I'm assuming elevation, all kinds of factors. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. Let's go to the next one here. Lacto fermentation. So this is like, the one thing I will say about lacto fermentation, it is like the easiest 2-ingredient thing that you can do to stretch your ingredients. Like y'all are looking to save money during COVID. Like this is. So usually what I do is I will take the fruit or vegetable, and because we're creating a liquid, like you can do it from a solid fruit, but because we're making this for all purposes today for liquid form, I juice it first. I'll either add the juice back into the fermentation, or I'll leave it separate and make some drinks out of that. So you're getting kind of like a little bit more volume for your buck. And then you can just take the pulp that's left over from juicing and add salt to it. The process here is that you'll add 20% salt to whatever the liquid solid thing is. Mix it all up and just leave it covered for like an hour while you're prepping something else. And what happens is the salt, just like an oleo would do, it like sucks all of the moisture out of your solid. And so you should have a little bit of liquid to start with. And if you don't, you can add a little bit of like of water. I usually recommend doing a distilled water or a mineralized water, something that's like really, really clean as opposed to tap water. But I've also done it with tap water as well. So it's all good. You have enough salt in there to kill any potential bacteria that could be in your water. That being said, use drink safe water, obviously. Another really important thing to remember with lacto fermentation is your type of salt. You're going to want to use a non-iodized salt. So pickling salt is obviously that's like what it was made for. I find pickling salt to be really hella salty. Doesn't taste very nice. Himalayan salt, also a type of sea salt. It's really nice, but it doesn't have, I find it's not quite salty enough. So it's like, a princess and a pea situation with those two ones. The one that I like best is just to use a really good quality sea salt. And then you should be pretty safe. Kosher salt is another one that sometimes people use. You just have to make sure that you're reading the ingredients and making sure that it doesn't have any anti-caking agents or iodine in there, which will mess up your fermentation, or it would just, it's not good. Just don't use that. Don't make sure that there's no like anti-caking agents in your salt. Sea salt is just the best.
So basically sea salt.
Sea salt, yes.
Sea salt.
Cool. Yeah, and then so the other thing about lacto fermentations is that they have to be anaerobic. And trust me, I did a lot of experimentation with this. I've done it in different areas. They were all like, I did it in a mason jar and then just tossed a lid on top of it. It really is not good enough. You really need to make sure that is an airtight thing that you're putting in there. So what I usually like to do, and I think I explained this just a second ago, but like say this is your liquid right there, put a little piece of plastic or like even a plastic bag. I've filled plastic bags like full of something that contains weight. So like either like cleaned rocks or like something that's heavy. I've even filled them with water. That works really well too. And then just put them on top of your jar so that the liquid starts rising on the side, so that that way you have a little bit of a seal, and then put something with weight, either like a book, and then you have started your lacto fermentation. So that's kind of my trick. That was also taken from the Noma Food Guide. So that's guide to fermentation. So that's their at-home method. If you don't know
it. And so it's sealed but not perfectly sealed.
Exactly. Like you'll still allow air out, and also it's like, but you do know that there's no outside contaminants coming in, and that's kind of their at-home way of doing it. So you can do it with like a mason jar and a plastic bag, as opposed to like a $3,000 vac sealer.
No big deal. It's a pandemic. Who doesn't have a $3,000 vac sealer?
Yeah. So
it's funny. As an aside, Nico DeSoto did a session for us. Love him. At Tiki by the Sea alumni, and he was like flashing all this amazing gear that he has, and he's like, here's what you should get, but if you can't, you could get this too. And everybody's like, oh.
It's good that he gave like options though.
Yeah. If you're like me, you have this.
Oh man. Right. So then the last thing that you're going to do is just leave it to sit. Again, length of time will depend on your climate, but you're going to wait for it to get an indication with lacto ferments is that the clear liquid that has come off of your vegetable, or if you've added a little bit of water to make a brine, that will get cloudy. And that's kind of the indication of when your ferment is done. So the the vegetables themselves are naturally going to lose a little bit of their vibrancy, their color, and the liquid is going to get cloudy. If you see anything that is a color that wasn't there to start with, like anything pink, black, you know, any other color that you didn't see there at the start, that whole thing is done. Like, just know that that was a contaminant. You messed up somewhere, something got in there, and just throw the whole thing away.
What's like a percentage somebody might expect as they're starting out with this to encounter, you know, screw ups? Like, what's like maybe an average?
As long as you've added enough salt, you're usually pretty fine. Like, lacto ferments are pretty safe. I think I've messed up 2, and I've done, I don't know,
a lot.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. Just kind of like smell them, look at them, and be aware, because like, yeah, those are the biggest. Smell and appearance are kind of the 2 biggest things. You know, if you think about if your cat were to look at it and be like, that's gross, you know, that's an indication an animal not eating it.
Fair enough.
I don't know why I made that reference, but I guess.
I'm sure we have some cat lovers out there.
Yeah. Okay, so kombucha. You don't have to go out and buy a kit for kombucha. I see so many people being like, oh, I'm going to go out and buy this. Like, you know, I went out and bought one just to see what it was. It was total bullshit, because they had essentially taken a piece of a SCOBY, which is what you need, and put it in an airtight jar so that little piece of thing died. And then it took like 6 weeks to get it back alive and get it going again. So all you really need is, and you can find these on like, you can buy them, you can, you know, find them on, there's a lot of like different groups on Reddit where you can just like go in and get a piece of a SCOBY. Essentially, like, if you have a healthy, happy, and alive SCOBY, I could chop this thing up like a pizza, give you guys a piece of it, and that would be your starter. And then all I would do is give you a little bit of the liquid. And that's all you need to get started with kombucha. It's super, super simple. You just have to make sure that like your vessels are clean and you're wearing gloves, and, you know, all of the contaminant things that I mentioned previously
Got it.
are not there.
There's a question here. What's a good fermentation process to produce acetic acid?
Ooh, let's talk about that. That's such
wow. Yes. I'm waiting for that one.
Yeah, because it's so easy. So the lacto fermentation is not one that I would recommend to use to produce lactic or acetic acid, but you can use either a beer or a SCOBY to create acetic acid. You can actually make a kombucha vinegar, beer vinegar, wine vinegars really, really easily that way. All you have to do is leave it to ferment. So you're tasting it as it goes. You can taste the sugar going down, and as that's happening, and it's like heating up the oxygen and producing CO2. Another byproduct that it's creating is acetic acid. So if you allow all of the sugar to get fully fermented, what it then starts doing is starting to produce acetic acid. So you can use this if, and this is kind of what I do with a lot of my different fermentations to add back into the cocktail. So I'll explain sort of a little bit of the process. I'll leave like let's say the peach ferment on. Once it's done and I think that peach wine is tasting sick, I'll pull that off, arrest that ferment, whether it's going in the fridge or whatever, and then I leave a little bit left in the jar, just enough for like maybe a liter, and allow that to ferment for an additional couple of days until it's like almost out of vinegar quality. And what you can do with that thing is add it back into your cocktail, and by not fermenting the whole thing, you have a lot more control as to how much acetic acid goes back into your cocktail. So you can actually end up using less lemon or lime juice as your sort of your acid level in the drink itself. It adds back into like things like stirred drinks really, really nicely, so that you don't have to, shake things, and also your stirred drinks don't get too sweet. You can kind of level back out the sweetness in your drinks with acetic acid. So that's a really good question. It's super, super easy. Just like leave a little bit of it left in that, because that's actually what I'm doing with this kombucha. That's why there's still a little left, is you can just keep that fermenting for an additional couple of days until it becomes acetic.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
So easy. A note on like teas in kombucha. I'm going to talk about teas, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about creating things that are bubbly. So there's I usually when I'm starting a kombucha, if I've gotten a SCOBY from somewhere, either like if you're getting it off of Reddit or you're getting it from, a producer that you don't necessarily know, you're going to want to make sure that like all of the conditions, the happy little house is like optimal for creating new kombucha, so that you really want to start with like a happy, healthy little boy in there, or girl, or whatever. However they identify. You're gonna really want to start with like really happy conditions in there, so that they can start bubbling, and then they can start, producing kombucha. So what I would do is start with a high tannin tea, something like an English breakfast or something like that, so that the tannins in the tea create the right conditions for the SCOBY to start producing kombucha. From there, once it's like really healthy, it's like it's fermented for a full cycle, and you'll know when it's done a full cycle when it starts producing a little baby underneath. It'll start like splitting away, so you get this like level of, it'll look like a scum for the first couple of days while it's still developing, and then it'll create a little baby underneath. That's when you know that you can start experimenting with other different teas. So I've done like green teas. I've done white teas are a lot more difficult because they have almost no tannin. And then I've also done like genmaicha, which is like a type of green tea with some like toasted rice. Yeah, so you can really start kind of getting super experimental. I would just like do one or two full I guess life cycles before you start adding different types of teas. And then, okay, so then getting stuff fizzy. There's two different ways that you can, if you want a fizzy kombucha. So like you can take off your kombucha after the first fermentation, and that's totally fine to drink if you want to drink it like that. There's also something you can do. You can do similar to how they make champagne. You can basically dump some sugar in there, screw on the lid so that it's airtight. And what the sugar does is that the mother inside the liquid starts eating the sugar and producing that CO2. And then because it's in a sealed container, it will start creating fizziness throughout. So that's kind of like the natural way to do it. What I do, and what I find if you're doing it from home and you don't want, the fear of this has never happened to me, but I've heard it happen to other people, is that, because you're creating CO2 inside of a closed container, that could explode. So what I do is I just have a home carbonation rig. There's I think I did an article on Trash Tiki about home carbonation. Yes, I did. So you guys can go hop on trashtikisocks.com, and I kind of go into how to carbonate things at home. It's super easy. I think you can get into a home carb rig for like less than $100. And then you can also control how many bubbles, and like, you're not relying on something naturally occurring because the bubbles are a lot softer. You can really get something like fizzy, like pop fizzy, which is super fun to start playing with. So whether or not, you want it, I guess it depends on your end goal, whatever you want your kombucha to end up like, whether you want it fizzy, if you want it as a vinegar inside of a still cocktail, or if you want to shake it. I definitely wouldn't make it fizzy in that case. So there's a lot of different options once you've done your primary fermentation, is to like, what are you going to do for your final end product?
Cool.
Yeah, it's super fun. Kombucha is fun. Also with that secondary fermentation, you can also start adding different juices and stuff. And this is how you can arrest the fermentation as well, is by adding a bunch of like citrus. Like you can do a little Paloma variation if you wanted to, and add like a bunch of grapefruit, and then allow it to get fizzy, which is really cool. Just as kind of like an example, like the possibilities are sort of endless with kombucha. Right. So the control factors, and I'm just going to run through this because we're running a little bit tight on time here. These are your control factors, whether you have a wild fermentation or you have a controlled fermentation. These are what you're going to want to make sure that you have some control over, so that you're controlling like the conditions inside the fermentation, and also how you control your flavor. So time obviously is something that we've talked about throughout this whole talk. Taste your fermentation daily. That is kind of how you're going to define when you really want to pull it off and know when your sugar content is at its optimal for whatever its end use might be. Whether it's like more of a syrup vibe, which will be more difficult to arrest, or whether it's more of an acetic vibe where you're trying to produce a vinegar. Temperature, so ambient temperature in the room, you're going to want to make sure it is between like 19 at the very coolest to 23 degrees. So it's kind of like a nice, happy room temperature. If you're comfortable, chances are your fermentation is comfortable. Sugar is another thing. So obviously you're going to start with some form of sugar in the start. This is lacto fermentation aside. This is just for the other two types of fermentations that we spoke about. You can do anything from like, demerara to like a panela to castor sugar. The only things that kind of get difficult are honey and agave. Like I said earlier, they're quite tight. So you're either going to want to start them with a little bit of water to kind of loosen them up. But they are very difficult to work with. So that's kind of like, once you've had like a little bit more experimentation experience with fermentation, wow, that was a mouthful. That's when you're going to work towards your like agaves and stuff like that. But I haven't had much. I've had a little bit of success with agave fermentations, but I had to use a really specific type of yeast that I don't remember at the moment. So
got it.
Yeah. Air, we've talked about this. This is kind of like a recap. So like, do you want it aerobic or anaerobic? Air quality is super important. Like I said, don't be walking by it kicking up dander and dust throughout the process. pH, the pH level, you're going to really want to pay attention to your fruit at the start. Are you starting with something that's a little bit acidic? So if it's a pineapple, if it's like something like cranberries, you really want to keep an eye onto it, so that you can make sure that like at day 3 or 4, if you don't have like something happening on day 3 or 4, you're really going to want to start watching it, because that's kind of when other contaminants can kind of get in there and start making their own little home inside of your fermentation, and nobody wants that. And then obviously
don't let them in the home.
Don't let them in the home. And then obviously this is like the funnest thing to do, is like when you really start experimenting with different fruits and stuff, like you're going to see a season of something come through and you're gonna be like, all right, we're going to ferment that. We're going to see how this works and figure out, what the best type of fermentation for that particular thing will be. And I've messed around, I've done lacto berry ferments, which, weren't all that successful. So like, this is kind of where you start really playing with stuff, and it can be really fun and really interesting. And it also like stretches out the season of something, which is kind of like the point of why I do all of this. There's a question here. Have you ever done a sake? I have not made my own sake. No. I haven't really experimented much with koji, but I do have a really good reference, just because I usually use miso more than I'll use koji for like a fermentation, because it is quite finicky and difficult, and also like it's cool to start, but I haven't done much fermentation in that way. I think it'd be really, really fun to do though. Got it. Yeah, maybe that's the next. There you go. This could be the start of something. Yeah. We'll be on the lookout for it. Could be super fun. But yeah, I use miso because it's pretty easy. Right. So we're going to make a drink. I don't know if you all have made these ingredients ahead. So we're going to start with this really delicious rum, Appleton's 8-year, and I'll just kind of do a little bit of a conversion as I go for those of you who are working in ounces. So 50 mils, we're just going to go 60 for fun because that's an even 2 ounces.
There you go.
Yeah.
Lean into it.
Yeah, for sure. There you go. I might have to jump out and get ice because I put the ice back in the freezer when we were starting this.
All good.
The pleasures of home bartending.
This is the perfect setup. You know? Just the bar there.
This is our, I guess I'll go in order here. So peach miso ferment that I put on earlier this week. This was just like during peach season. Peaches, castor sugar, and actually I used castor sugar and a little bit of miso, which for that person that asked the sake question, you could definitely grow your own koji if you wanted to. It's just that miso is so readily available and it's kind of easy to get your hands on. So we're going to do 1.5 ounces of that, or 45 mils. And then what I did I do 15 mils of just lime juice.
Let's see.
There we go. You could also like cut this down and do like 7 mils of lime and add a little bit of verjus, which I use quite often. I find verjus to be, depending on who the winery was, it's just a byproduct of wine production. Got a little bit of a vinegary quality as well. And that really cuts down on the amount of lime juice that you have to use. And it's also shelf stable, so you don't have to worry about it going off as quickly. And grab ice. Can't believe it.
We'll be here. We'll throw it up again here.
There we go. Luckily, I had the little Cambro all ready to go.
Perfect. Timothy says hi from Navy Strength in Seattle.
Oh, nice. Hi. It's so weird not being able to see the people that I'm having a chat.
Great.
There we go. This is probably going to get really loud. I don't know.
We'll be all right.
Shaking many drinks online, you know?
Sounds fine. It's actually it's nice to hear it again.
Yeah, I know. This is a nice sound. So you can, I actually changed the recipe after having a couple of these last week, and I'm going to double strain this. I think the original said just shake and dump tiki style in there, but I found it a lot nicer and a little bit cleaner to double strain. And that's our boy. It's super delicious. It's definitely on the funkier scale of things, which I think goes really nicely with the Appleton's rum. It's got a little bit of funk. So like anytime you're using like a fermented ingredient, it just lends itself really nicely to terroir style base spirits. I find, I'm just kind of speaking from my own experience. I really like using them with like rums or tequilas or things that you can kind of taste the terroir, because they have their own terroir, and when you match up the things that you're fermenting, that it just has this really like lovely synonymous quality that is so tasty. And now I get one of these. This is nice.
There you go. Winning. All right. So just some contact info to share with you guys. Kelsey at thetrashcollective.com, @TrashTiki. Tip jar, PayPal, Kelsey at thetrashcollective.com. Or there's another one with the link on Crowdcast. I know you're donating. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'm gonna donate all the. So I think because I'm not too sure if anyone's gonna have any troubles or like extra fees to send it up here to Canada. So I think maybe I'll post a link in my bio or something where you guys can donate to somewhere in the States. And then I'm just going to donate that all to the Bartenders Benevolent Fund up here in Canada, so that it just goes straight back into the hospitality industry.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much.
So rad. Really appreciate it. We're going to bring on Josh, who's been waiting patiently to ask him a few questions. We're going to put you aside for one moment. We'll be right back to you, Kelsey. Thank you so much. Okay. Josh. Can you hear
Hello.
us?
I can. I got a hotspot delivered in the process of sitting on here.
Wow, that's pretty solid moves. Well done. Well done. I love those colors. All right. Let's ask you some
Fall
questions.
colors.
Favorite Tiki by the Sea memory?
I'd say on the second to last night, ended up a few Tiki by the Sea folks, and it was just had a great time.
That's it. That's all we're getting. Had a great time.
Had a great time. But I loved it. A really fun aspect.
Right on. One thing people don't know about Steve Casey.
Uh-oh. I hope he freezes right now so that
Yeah.
no one can hear him.
There you go.
I guess I met Steve. I met Steve through my friend Sarah Ivy in New Orleans, who now lives in Australia. But
That's true. Josh and I actually met before either of us were really doing cocktail stuff. Like I was working behind a bar, but like we met before you were shooting cocktail photography.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
back in my Whole Foods days.
Oh yeah, like 2011.
Yeah,
Whole Foods. Tell us about that.
started sneaking into Tales of the Cocktail every year.
Oh yeah.
All right. Next question. Favorite meal in Wildwood? Favorite meal?
Favorite meal? I think that was probably the first night. Your parents make
Clam bake.
clam
Yeah,
bake.
that's a popular one.
Oh great.
All right. Weirdest thing you saw in Wildwood? Weirdest thing.
Weirdest thing. Uh,
I like how he freezes like right at the answer.
Staircase at what's that?
I was like, right when you go to answer it, you freeze real quick.
Oh yeah. I'd say probably the Jetson staircase at the Caribbean Motel.
That is epic and very weird.
I'm wearing my Caribbean shirt right now.
Yeah, that's got this hot
Oh,
solid.
I've got that shirt too.
It's great.
I've got that shirt in yellow.
I feel like I was supposed to buy one and then I forgot. Yeah, I'll have to do that this time. All right. Tell us what's up in your world, other than being at the lake.
Haven't been doing too much. Ended up buying a Sprinter van and have been sort of like traveling around the country.
That's awesome.
Just telling people that I'm not actually their Amazon delivery.
That's pretty good. Where have you been so far?
Yeah. What's that?
Where have you been so far?
I've been to the Badlands, White Sands, New Mexico, all up now, and I think I'm going to try to do like upstate New York on my way back home. Maybe stop in Wildwood on the way home.
Oh, yeah, do it.
Stop in
Do it.
Wildwood.
Crab
Yeah.
Cake Hotline. Just say hi to Tom and Jenny. They'd love to see you.
Of course.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. We're going to add Kelsey back. So rad. Thanks, everybody,
Right.
for joining
Thanks
us
for having me.
science class. It's never been more exciting to sit through a class on fermentation. So rad.
Thank you guys for having me. This was so fun.
What's that?
Thanks for having me. This was so fun.
It was great. We hope to have you again and also in person at some point when events happen in the future universe. Good luck with everything, with the to-go cocktail biz and whatever else rad, which is I'm sure coming. Keep fighting the fight, guys.
Yeah, big time.
All right.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Oh, next week we've got Claire Sprouse, part 2 of sustainability. All hands on deck. Why Tiki must get green. Sponsored by De Kuiper. Thanks much for joining.